Welcome to Caregiver Cast with Elaine Petrucci. Are you overwhelmed raising a family, working full-time, caring for a parent or grandparent? It can be challenging when you're doing it alone. Caregiver Cast helps busy, burned-out professionals reduce their stress and overwhelm to create a better caregiving experience for themselves and their loved one. Caregiver Cast brings caregivers together with experts who provide information in a variety of areas. In each episode, you'll get tips on topics such as finance, legal, medical, self-care, community resources, mindset, and more. We're here to make your caregiving journey a more rewarding one. Acquire the confidence and skills to be a more capable caregiver by implementing the resources and strategies from these expert thought leaders. Get a community of support, resources, and strategies for your caregiving journey inside the Caregiver Lifeline community. Visit caregiverlifelinecommunity.com. And now here's your host, Elaine Petrucci.
Hi, welcome to Caregiver Cast. My name is Elaine Petrucci, your host. My guest today is Lisa Manzo, who will be talking to us about showing someone that you're caring for the love and respect that they deserve. Before I formally introduce Lisa to you, I will give you some background information about her. Lisa Manzo is an author, speaker, mindset mentor, teacher, and nurse. Lisa has extensive experience working with clients and a lifetime experience working on herself. Lisa has risen from depression and addiction to live life on her terms. People looking to transform their lives hire Lisa to help them overcome limiting beliefs and gain life-changing confidence to live the life of their dreams. What sets her apart from others is Lisa's natural and intuitive understanding of her clients, which enables her to lead her clients through the process. Lisa is fiercely committed to empowering people to change their mindset, thus transforming their lives. Welcome, Lisa, to Caregiver Cast. How are you?
Good. Thanks for that introduction. I'm very well today, and thank you for having me because this is a great conversation to have.
Most definitely. I think this is where a topic where caregivers find the most challenge is loving the person that you're caring for, especially when you're burnt out, overwhelmed, and stressed to the max. So,
oh yeah.
Can you give us an idea of briefly how you got into nursing and then how it helped you in your caregiving with your father?
Sure. I was a teacher in New York, and I love teaching. I still do it. And I decided that I wanted to teach and not monitor behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And because children today, there's behaviors, and I don't want to have to teach behavior. I want to teach the information. And so I decided that I would go for a switch. Prior to becoming a teacher, I had decided teacher, nurse. I couldn't decide. So I went for the teacher, and then I ended up switching to nursing anyway. And interestingly enough, it was a great switch for me because had I not become a nurse, my father never would have let me help him.
Wow.
Because he would have thought that he knew enough. He knew as much as I did. So he didn't need me and he wouldn't ask me. But because I became a nurse, he allowed me to help him, which if I wasn't a nurse, he would never have let me do that.
That is amazing. So
Yeah.
He really respected your profession then to allow you to use your expertise when he needed it. So
and I will tell you one other thing he said. He said, normally I wouldn't let people practice on me, but I know because I had just finished nursing school, but I know you had to practice on somebody, so I let them now.
Wow.
Interesting. Yep.
Yes. you could practice with your father. Hey, I like that.
I never practiced on him, but he, like, when he would be in the hospital and he'd get it, somebody who was learning, he would let them practice on him. He didn't let me practice on him.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Well,
Yeah.
at least he showed an appreciation of what nursing is all about and how difficult it can be, depending on the patient that they're working with at that particular point in time. So when did you become a caregiver for your father, and what was your feeling initially about taking care of him?
Okay, so, he was doing fairly well. He had mild dementia. He had short-term memory loss, but really nothing significant. He was still able to drive. It was really not affecting him. And then towards the end, when I graduated nursing school, he fell, and he didn't break anything. He didn't get any cuts or bruises, but he got a bleed in his brain. And so we thought he had a stroke. And when we finally got him to the hospital, it took us days to get him to agree to go. He's lucky that they were able to help him. Anyway, they relieved the pressure on his brain, drained the blood. And in that moment, so that's a lot of anesthesia for surgery. And then they found out when he was at the hospital, he needed a double bypass and a valve replacement. So he just had 6 hours of anesthesia, and anesthesia is awful on the brain, even if you don't have dementia. But if you have dementia, it makes it worse. And then he had to have an 8-hour heart surgery. Okay. So with each surgery, his dementia got worse. So he had 16 hours roughly of anesthesia within 2 months. And then 8 months later, he needed another 2 or 3 hours. He needed a stent to put in his his renal artery. So he didn't lose his one working kidney, because the other one atrophied because the renal artery was clogged, and he didn't know that. Nobody was monitoring him. And that was his fault, because he decided he didn't want to go to the doctors anymore. So he took a 3-year break.
Oh.
Yeah. And he didn't tell anybody that. And so then after that, he needed the battery replaced on his pacemaker, which is another couple hours of surgery. And he never really fully recovered after the heart surgery. He was never able to gain the weight back. He was 117 pounds. He had shrunk, because his back curved. He'd shrunk 4 inches. And so he was never able to gain that weight back. And his quality of life really went down after having that heart surgery. And the heart surgeon, before he did it, he told my father, all the things, and he told me all the things that would happen and or likely to happen or could happen. And he was very specific. And he said, I'm not limiting it to this. This is just what I've seen. You are going to have complications because of his age, period, end of story. He was very clear on that. And my father asked me if he should have the heart surgery. And I didn't think so, because he'd have quality of life until he went. He wouldn't live that much longer, but he'd have quality of life. And then what happened was he had decided to have the surgery, which I fully supported whatever decision he wanted to make. And then those last 2 years were really tough. And he never told me, but he always told my mother, I wish I never had that surgery. I wish I never had that surgery. Which I found very interesting, that he just wished, because his quality, he knew it. He couldn't do things. So anyway, here we are with all this anesthesia. He can't even figure out his medicine anymore and what to take. And he's very confused. So I'm putting medicine. I'm going every other week to his house to do his medicine. And I come, if I come every 2 weeks or every week, there's always 2 or 3, or, if it's every 2 weeks, there's at least 5 days he's missed taking his medicine completely. I'm trying to call him on the phone. He can't hear. He won't wear his hearing aid. To tell him to take the medicine. It was tough. And, he was fiercely independent, did not want to, was not going to live with one of his children. Absolutely not. And, I had enough respect for my father that I wanted him to finish his life the way he wanted, not the way I wanted.
Mhm. Yeah, that's sometimes a hard
Mhm.
thing to accept, but ultimately it's their choice.
Absolutely. And he made a lot of choices in his life. And you know what? It was his decision and it was his life. And I just needed to respect it and honor it. And I mean, it was not easy for me, but he was my dad. It was his choice. Just like, when I get older, it's my choice, not my children's choice. It's my choice.
Mhm.
Especially if I'm making my wishes known now, just in case. And my father wasn't really clear about that stuff because he was like, he had it in his will that if things aren't going so good, it wasn't a DNR. Because I had that conversation with doctor. I thought he had a DNR. He didn't have a DNR. He had this document, this living will that said if things weren't going so well, and he was going to be like paralyzed or bedridden, to let him go, but to
Mhm.
try to do everything he can. If you thought that he would be able to walk around and live, he wanted to live. So he never signed a DNR. And so I respected that. And even when I became his healthcare proxy and took over, I never changed it because this was his will. Even
Mhm.
though I wanted to change it. I wanted to change it because I've seen what happens to the elderly when they don't have a DNR and they do CPR on them. They break all their ribs because they're so brittle anyway, and it's not intentional. Just doing the pressure on the chest breaks them, and it's heartbreaking to see. And then if they get better, they usually don't. So but
Mm.
I did respect his wishes. This is what he put down, and we went with it.
Okay. Did he ever explain to your mother why he wished he didn't have the heart surgery?
No, no,
He did.
he wasn't able to verbalize that. He just
Mm.
knew that he wished he didn't. My parents were separated at the time. They were just friends at that point. So, if I couldn't go one weekend, she'd go visit him so that somebody was always there, that
Mhm.
he wasn't alone because at this point he didn't have any concept of time. So 2 weeks for me not being there felt like an eternity for him. He felt abandoned.
Mhm. Okay. So when did you start doing more for him besides just the medication management?
Well, from right from the heart surgery on, I would take him to every doctor's appointment. He never went without me after that, ever, because he couldn't remember what the doctor said anymore. And then his kidney doctor was way too far for him to get to. And we weren't going to start with a new one at this point. So I would drive to him. It would be an all day affair. Like it'd take me an hour to get to him. It'd take us an hour to 45 minutes to an hour to get to the doctor, waiting for the doctor, and then it's an all day affair. It wasn't that often, but I went to every doctor appointment with him
Mhm.
at that point. And anything else I could do for him. I mean, he was still able to go to the store. The store was 3 to 5 blocks away. I can't remember. And so he was able to go to the store and he passed his driving test at 85.
Wow.
Yeah, somebody said he was a danger. And I don't know if he was or if he wasn't. And he did pass his driving test at 85. So I guess he wasn't. And he never had an accident. He hadn't had an accident in forever, and he went to the store or the gym, and that was it. He didn't really drive anyplace else.
Mhm. When did things get more involved, more intense for
So
your father?
about 2 months before he was before he died, I just noticed a shift in him. It's not something I can actually describe to you, but I could see there was a change in him. And my intuition said he wasn't going to live that much longer. So then I would go on the weekends, and then sometimes I would only have to work like a couple of hours on Wednesday. So I'd go Wednesday afternoon. So I went as much as possible to see him, but he was still getting around and driving. So I mean, and he was feeding himself and he would go to the store. So there was only so much I could do for him. And then the Saturday before he died, I went to visit him, and there was even bigger change at this point. What happened was, the house was very messy, and he wasn't like that. He had a lot of stuff, but it wasn't messy like that. And there was a lot of stuff on the floor, and and then I was looking at his hands, and he couldn't really do this, so he couldn't pick up what was on the floor
Mm,
any longer because he couldn't do this.
mm,
And that was a huge change. And also he'd asked me to look at his toes, right? And I never got a chance to because he always had a list for me and we'd get through it, but the toes never made it on the list. And I think they were turning black because
mm,
of the circulation. He couldn't feel his feet anyway because he had peripheral neuropathy, so he walked, he was very wobbly. And he asked me to look at his toes and I did it. And so that last day, he couldn't really pick things up. So I went around his house and picking up the paper towels that had fallen on this floor and things like that. And he had a space heater in his house because he was always so cold.
mhm.
And then I'm not thinking too much of it. And then 3 days later, I got the phone call that there was a fire in his apartment and he died of smoke inhalation.
Mm.
So that was quite interesting. That was like, wow. Because
Nope.
he had so many things wrong with him, but nothing that was actually killing him. But is the way I can explain it.
But
Yeah.
it's still, it's always a hard thing to get that feeling like they're not going to make it. And what made you persevere and what made you change your mindset to show him love instead of lashing out?
Well, it wasn't actually a change of mindset. It was just like, this is what it is. And
Mm,
I love him. And me, first of all, when he gets mad at me, he doesn't even understand what's going on in his head. So he's
mm,
mad more at the frustration of the fact that he can't get out of his head, get it out of his mouth what he wants. So he's frustrated. So he's taking it out on me. So being in healthcare, I understand that when the patients are like that, they take it out on the person they're closest to. So, it was what it was. And my mom tried to make it better for me. And oh, here it comes. And so she was helpful. And my kids tried to make it better for me. They helped me when they could, but it was still sad. It's 7 years later and it's still sad.
mhm.
And
I can feel.
it was 2 years of, and I don't want to say misery because it wasn't misery. I want to say it was 2 years of challenging times because there are people that are much worse than my father was. He was actually an easy person compared to some of the things I've seen. So I considered myself grateful for what I had to help him with because it was insignificant compared to some other things that other people have to do. So I felt very lucky.
Mhm. My heart goes out to you. I know it's really hard to lose a parent, especially one that you've been helping for a length of time.
Yeah, and he was my buddy. We did so many things together. We had a lot of fun together too. So I was really close to him, and I was telling some when he passed, everybody was like, "Oh, how's Lisa gonna take it?" Because we were really close. But the reality of it is, when they're in that state, you're grieving for them while they're alive because they're not that person who you knew anymore. So when he passed, it was like I'd already been doing all my grieving.
mhm.
I mean, a little bit more, but most of my grieving was done while he was alive because I was missing that person that was no longer inside.
Mhm. Well, that must have been a challenge, just going through that grief and still
And still
be
seeing
so loving and caring.
Yep. Yeah, because you're feeling all of that. And I don't know that people realize that, they're alive, but you're still grieving for the loss because it's just it's just their body. The person they were is not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it and it was what it was. Like you asked me to tell, you heard my story and you asked me to come here and tell it. And it's great. And I know it's gonna help somebody. And I don't think it's a big deal because this is just the hand I was dealt, and I played it to the best of my ability because
Mm-hmm.
this is what life is. You do the best with what you got. And I couldn't change his healthcare status and his health status if I wanted to, because if I would have done something.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
so I hope that answered that question. I'm not really sure it did.
You're doing amazingly well. I know, for me, I guess I maybe didn't recognize that I was grieving for my mother who had Alzheimer's at the time. I
Right.
think it you came more after the fact, but you're right. They do change,
Yes.
and I just felt like I still had to have that relationship with my mother, even though she wasn't able to communicate anymore, or but she could through her, facial features and gestures and body
Energetic-
language.
Energetically, she could communicate. But I
Right.
also want to say that I didn't realize I was grieving at the time that he was still alive. I didn't realize that until after. So when I say that, I can tell you now that that's what was happening because hindsight is 2020. But
Mhm.
at the time, I didn't understand that that's what was going on in my own head, that I was grieving him.
Mhm. You're right. It's hard to see the changes in a person, um, and knowing that you can't make it better. You could just do the things, include the things that they enjoy doing,
Yeah.
so that they have some semblance of a quality of life. What was it, your teaching training, nursing training, or your relationship with your father prior to him getting sick? Um, what really gave you the strength to help your father along with your mother, and your other siblings didn't?
I if there was no option, this is what I was going to do. But this is the way it is. Like my father helped his brother, his older brother.
Mm,
Um, you know, his older brother lived with him for a few years. He helped him because he that was his mindset. This is what we do. We help our family. So it's just something that got programmed into me from him. This is what we do. I watched him do it. I did it for him.
mhm. Well, he really set a very good example
Yeah.
about what it means to take care of family.
Right. And the reality of it is he wasn't really shouldn't have been taking care of him because he really wasn't in the best of health at the time anyway to take care of somebody who needed um you know help. And we couldn't talk him out of it. We tried to, but we couldn't talk him out of it. And he was just set on it. And I'm like, okay, well, this is another choice you're making.
What can you, what three takeaways can you give caregivers in terms of having a mindset of being loving and giving and caring when they're taking care of someone that they may not, um,
Well, one of the things is you can only do what they'll allow you to do.
mm,
And and the need for you to accept that because
okay, right.
they're an adult, they've lived their life, and they didn't get there. They got there on their own, and you know, they have choices. You may see better options for them, yet they have choices, and it's still important as long as they can. My father was rational enough to be able to make choices, reasonable choice. He didn't make any unsafe choices. You know, he wasn't doing unsafe things. He wasn't leaving the stove on, you know, things like that, where we thought that something bad could happen to him. And so he wasn't having those kinds of issues. And if they're not having those kind of issues, if you make them move and take them out of their environment when they have dementia, you make them 10 times worse because their brain cannot acclimate to the new place and
Mhm,
they feel lost.
mhm,
And do what you can and be guilt free. Do what you can.
mhm.
I had
Oh,
people try to put guilt on me for my father living living by himself. And then one lady said to me after the fire, and the one lady in the building, "You should be ashamed of yourself for letting him live alone." And I was like, "Have you met my father? There's no way he would have lived with me. No way." And I've asked him multiple times. I s-
mhm.
I don't have zero guilt here. I did everything I could within my power because he still had free choice.
Yes, you did, but I mean, the cognitive delay is more so after the second heart surgery. That didn't worry you I mean, maybe that's what this woman was
It,
attempting to
it,
say. I have no idea.
it could be. And you know what? I don't know. All I know is I did everything within my power to make my father feel empowered to let him live out the rest of his life in his house, which he wanted. And he got to do that. So he got to do that. So success on my part.
Oh, I would agree. And thank you so much for sharing your story because I know it's not easy to talk about a person that you've loved and had been taken care of. So besides letting them make a safe choice, let's say, there
Yes.
you go, um, and keeping them in their environment, what else can you
And I said,
recommend?
remain guilt free.
There we go. Thank you.
Remain guilt free because people have their ideas of how things should happen, but when you actually go and do stuff, that's not the reality. And what you visualize in your mind is never what happens, right?
Mhm.
So I don't have to worry about them because they're not in my situation. So whatever their judgment is, it's wrong because you can't judge me until you walk a mile in my shoes and you aren't his daughter. So
No, you're right. I agree with you. I mean, you can only do as much as they will allow you to do.
yeah, absolutely. And you know, just I was at peace with it, you know, it was it is what it is. We all die, right?
Mhm.
Everybody dies. I knew it was coming. And I just decided that I was going to live in the happy memories that that from my dad. And in my room, I have things that remind me of him. So when I wake up in the morning, I have a shoehorn hanging on the wall. And I have a shoehorn because my dad and I had he always would, since I was in my teens, was always telling me, you need to get a shoehorn, you need to get a shoehorn. And I'm like, Dad, the day I promise you, the day I ruin a pair of shoes by slipping my foot in them, I will get a shoehorn. So I did that this year. So I got a shoehorn. I ruined a pair of shoes by slipping my foot in it instead of opening the laces, and I got a shoehorn.
Okay, there you go.
So now that shoehorn hangs in my on a thing in my bedroom, and every time I use it, I think of him. But I have other things in my room too that I look around and I just smile because it reminds me of how quirky he was,
Hmm.
you know.
Sounds like he passed on some really wonderful traits to you and your siblings in
Yeah.
terms of showing who he was.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, we knew who he was. My brother wrote the absolute best eulogy for him, and it was fantastic. And I got to read it. I got to read it. He wrote it. I got to read it. and he had we just brought him to life in the moment. And so even people that didn't know him, because my brother wrote such a great eulogy for him,
Mm-hmm.
they felt like they got a glimpse into, the kind of person he was,
Mm-hmm.
right? So,
Awesome.
we told some really cool stories. One of them was, if you were in the car with my father and he asked you a question and you answered too fast, he said, that was too fast. I forget what his reasoning was. He would tell us we answered too fast. You must have been planning that. And then if we took too long to answer, he would tell us too slow, too slow. What are you making things up? And
Uh,
so you couldn't win either way. So we just laughed about that,
mm-hmm.
It was just one of his quirks. And so you had to just answer you only had a certain amount of time, like a window of time to answer. Otherwise you were too fast and too slow.
Did you ever figure out that time frame?
Yeah.
Nah, I know.
What for? It was fun. We would laugh at him when he would say that stuff. So we would just all crack up when that would come up. It wasn't even, wasn't. We need to know the answer.
Right. Appreciate him for who he.
Yeah, love people for who they are, not who you want them to be.
Well, that's just it. I mean, you can't. You have to accept the person no matter what changes occur.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, my mother never became very combative. However, I know that would have been a challenge, is to really, realize that, she couldn't,
Right.
somebody can't help what they're going through.
But think about this, right? So what you just said, right? My mother never came combative, right? That was a blessing for you.
Mhm.
Right? Even in all of this stuff and the trials and the challenges, that was a blessing for you.
Mhm.
Because some people have that challenge and then it makes caring even harder for them. So, and it's the way you look at it. Somebody can say, oh, she's not able to do this and this and this, but you out of your mouth, she was not combative, and
Right.
that was a blessing.
Mhm. You're right. Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things for some caregivers, is just um, a accepting the person when they go through these changes, and to um, being frustrated, especially if they never had a really good relationship with someone that they're taking care of. So
Yeah, that's a whole different ball game, because I didn't experience that, right?
Mm.
I experienced caring for somebody who I had a very good relationship with it. And God bless those people who don't have a good relationship with their parents and care for them anyway. How
Mhm.
beautiful is that?
Mhm. I agree very well. Yep. Oh, that is so amazing. I really appreciate you taking time and sharing your story, and how love can really make a big difference in the way you care for somebody that you love.
And I honor my father by telling his story.
Mhm.
I honor my father by telling his story, because it's really his story that I'm part of,
Mhm.
right?
I love
And
that.
it is, it's his story. I get to be a part of it. And now, in my story, it'll be my story, but this was his story, his choices, and I got to participate.
Yes, you did. And you handled it very graciously and very lovingly, so that you allowed him to make those choices, to stay at home, being somewhat safe, with
I
some
will
support.
I will tell you though that that last conversation I had with him, I told him it was time. I did tell him, I said, Dad, you can't stay here any longer. Because when I saw the stuff around the house and I had to clean it, that was a big change for him. And I
Mhm.
said, Dad, you can't stay here anymore. And if I would have been, if my son if one of my children wasn't still home and I wasn't taking care of my child, I could have moved in with him and just helped him there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I could have, because it's easier for me to go there than for him to come to my house. But yet that wasn't an option at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the way life was and with my job, it just was not an option, and it's okay. It's okay.
Right. As long as you did the best you could for him when he was alive, I think that's the most important takeaway from in honoring your father by talking about his journey with caregiving. And I really respect you for that.
And I will tell you, the last year of his life, he didn't know. We spent my birthday together. He didn't even know it was my birthday, and I didn't have the heart to tell him because he would have felt bad that he didn't remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They do get to that point where remembering important things like that finally disappear.
Yeah, and I mean, it was one birthday out of how many? So I mean, it was fine. It was like in the scheme of things. But let's see. It was one birthday out of 53. I get.
Mhm.
You get some slack, Dad. You can miss a
Yeah.
birthday.
Exactly. No kidding.
Yeah.
Hey, Lisa, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your father's story. I really felt so much about your passion for taking care of your father, and I'm sure it carries over in your nursing career in the long-term care setting. So thank you very much for being here and sharing your story today.
Thanks for having me. It was wonderful.
Thank you for listening to the Caregiver Cast today. Get a community of support, resources, and strategies for your caregiving journey inside the Caregiver Lifeline community. Visit caregiverlifelinecommunity.com. Get involved with the show. Send your email to mpetrusi2002@gmail.com. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of Caregiver Cast.